What's your best? I didn't just dodge a bullet, I dodged a tactical nuke story. When I was 14 years old, I went to my best friend's house for her birthday party. A 30-year-old guy that worked for their parents asked her to tell me that he wanted to take me out on a date. I said I had a boyfriend. He seemed nice at first, but he started following us everywhere and would just stand back, staring at us. They had a huge farm. I got nervous and called my mom to come pick me up. Months later, we saw his wanted poster at our grocery store. He was the serial killer Angel Resondez, the railway killer. My mom didn't believe me until it was on America's Most Wanted that night, and they interviewed my friend's foster parents. That's when she freaked out. The good old. I avoided a serial killer without knowing at the time story. These absolutely blow my mind when I see these, because one small decision changed the course of this person's life and easily could have gone the other way. Never feel bad about saying no if you feel your safety is threatened. I'd take being rude over losing my life any day. My mom's best friend had a son get out of prison. He was doing tattoos for a living. We lived in a state where tattoos were still illegal at the time, so he and his mom came to our house to give us a tattoo. I was 18 years old at the time, and I think he was in his early 20s. We were told he went to prison because, while he did have a drug problem at the time, he took the fall for someone carrying a ton of drugs. His mom kept hinting, and eventually outright suggesting, that I let him take me on a date. She swore up and down he needed a good influence like me. I'll admit, I did feel pressured quite a bit. His mom was one of my favorite people in the world, and I felt like I was letting her down. But I was not feeling it. The dude was not attractive at all. Worst of all, he was covered in swastikas, that he claimed was to survive prison. I also found it really creepy that he kept oddly stroking my foot while doing a tattoo several inches above my ankle. But we managed to end the tattoo party with no dates made. Cool. About 3 months later, I'm listening to the news as background noise and I hear her son's name mentioned, and that police are looking for him. He strangled his girlfriend and all 4 of her children after the girlfriend caught him molesting one of the kids. When it's said that the other person needs someone to be a good influence, that's a huge red flag. Right away, it says the other person has some recognized crap qualities and is unwilling or unable to make changes to their own life, and you are expected to be the one to correct them and convince them to change. That, or the person really has a need to have a positive influence and would benefit from such relationships. In either case, proceed with much caution. Yep, the second commenter is spot on. Anytime I hear a couple talking about how one person was such a positive influence on the other person and helped them completely change, I am always a bit skeptical. Often in those situations, one person is carrying a heavier load than the other because they have their own issues. Plus, they are expected to carry much of the load of the other person as well. Definitely be careful with these people, but you are the only person that can judge them properly to come to your own conclusion. When I was a young child, I was outside playing with the hose by myself. A man appeared at my fence and asked me to come over. I walked over. He leaned down and picked me up. I started kicking at him and he dropped me almost immediately, then walked away. After that, I ran inside, hid in my closet and never told a single person. I had almost forgotten about it, or thought I had imagined it until years later when my mom was telling me about how they recently solved a cold case of a man who kidnapped and murdered a girl around my age at the time from our neighborhood and left her body in a field a few miles from our house. Not nearly as scary as your story, but when I was about 9 years old, I was outside playing in front of my grandma's house. She lived next door to us. I lived in a major city, but on a side street which was off of another side street. Generally, only people from the neighborhood ever drove around here. This car stops in front of my grandma's house. There's a man and a woman in the car. The woman is in the passenger seat and closest to me. She rolls down her window and says something to me, but I can't quite hear her. She motions for me to come a bit closer. Something just seemed off about both of them, and my gut was telling me to run. I told her she needed to speak more loudly. She said they were lost and needed directions and motioned again for me to come closer to the car. Again, my gut was screaming no. So I said, I don't think I can help you. I'll go get my dad. And I ran to my house as fast as my little legs would carry me. I told my dad what happened, and when he looked out the window, they were long gone. I'm really glad I listened to my gut. That's so scary. I had a very similar situation. Again, not quite as scary, but it spooked the hell out of me at the time. I was about 12 years old, and my brother was about 7. My dad parked right in front of the store, pointed through the glass door at the bread stand, and said he needed bread and would only take 12 seconds. While he was inside, my brother and I were chatting, fighting, and I was cut off by tapping on the window. I thought maybe my dad had forgotten his keys, and I looked out. Next to me, a leathery-looking man wearing leather and with tattoos on his scalp was glaring at us, arms wrapped up around himself, and he was looking around him, throwing weight from one foot to the other. The car park was empty. He motioned for me to get out of the car or roll the window down. My dumbass brother told me I should. I told him to shut up and keep still. I shook my head at the man, saw the car was unlocked, panicked and locked it. He tried the handle and I thought I was going to die. My butthole brother in the back seat is still telling me to do what the man says. Now he's babbling about knowing him and that he's probably the uncle of some kid from school. I distinctly remember the phrase, "Billy's uncle is a robber." I'm pretty sure it's him. We should talk to him. I swear to God, I could have thrown out the whole child. The dude steps away from the car, still all shifty looking, and checks the license plate. Then he jumped into a running van with tinted windows that had been idling perpendicular to us. There was a woman in the driver's seat glaring at us. I just remember how mad they both looked, like they hated us, and how focused they looked, like they were working on a mouth problem they didn't want to be caught doing. Anyway, after he jumped in, they drove off. The next day, an Amber Alert went out for an attempted child abduction in the same parking lot. The police didn't take us seriously when we called, but I guess he tried again the next day and was taken seriously. Okay, if we are all sharing our stories, I want to tell mine as well, which is something I've never told anyone. I was about 14 years old at the time, and I was once working out at the gym with my dad. There was this man who kept looking at me who I had never seen before. One of my dad's friends was there, and they had actually warmly greeted each other, so I didn't feel too weirded out by it at first. I caught him enough times, however, to make note of his face, and he had this look each time that likely harbored ill intention. About a week later, I was walking my dogs just before nightfall, and I saw a strange car. My mom always said I've had a New Yorker's sense of security, even though I'm Southern, so I take note of the vehicles that normally come down my lane, but this time it was different. The car turned down my direction, and it was at that moment that I made eye contact with the same man from the gym who almost let out a shocked expression. I kept going with my mind racing as to what was going on. Meanwhile, he stopped the car about halfway down my lane. I kept going about my walk, thinking I should reach out to a jogger I saw passing by, but I was too afraid, thinking I was overreacting. Nevertheless, as I returned from the walk, alarms started going off in my head. The car was still there, except he had turned around and approached my direction. I would have to walk right past his stopped car to get home. At this point, I walked into the neighbor's yard at the top of my street, and to affirm my alarmed suspicions, he turned his car and shined the lights at the bushes I crept into. It was at that moment that I took off running away from my street, but he followed. I swear my neighborhood had never been so empty as it was in that moment, but I ran until I reached our boat landing, which was fenced in. I eventually raced down to the end, where I pondered jumping in the water and swimming over to our dock to escape as his car circled around and stopped at the gate. After 5 minutes of anticipation, he actually left, and I made my way shakily back home, where I had some friends apparently waiting to hang out with me. I was literally trying to stop myself from shaking. I never told anybody about it, but a few days after that, a mysterious car would show up very late at night and stop in front of our house, only to repeat the cycle intermittently for a few months. I always stood watching for someone to get out, but they never did, and eventually they stopped showing up. I'll never know what that person's intentions were that day, but I'll always tell myself I dodged a tactical nuke. God, these stories give me goosebumps as I read them. I wouldn't be surprised if almost everyone at some point has had some weird encounter with strangers. That kind of introduces you to the terrors of the real world and reality as a kid. I have a similar story, but I won't go too in depth with it. Basically, whenever I was really young, I would go to a daycare where we would often play outside on a huge fenced-in playground. I started to notice a man that would stand at the gate and just stare at the kids. I felt like every time I had looked his way, he was just staring at me, not even blinking. I never told anybody at the time, but even to this day it's hard for me to even comprehend if it was true or not. I had nightmares about this guy for a long time as a kid. I would be playing on the same playground and the same man would lock eyes with me, but then they would turn red and he had this really evil look on his face, like he was about to do something terrible. I often wonder if as kids, we make things a bigger deal than they really are. What if that man was just another kid's parent that was watching his kid play or something? I guess I'll never know, but still, I feel like almost everyone has some weird story like this, and I wonder how many of them were just our mind playing tricks on us as we grew up with our parents constantly telling us to be careful of strangers and weird people.